Hey folks, Dr. Don Ford here. Hope everyone's having a great day. I want to take a little bit of time to talk to you about the actual research proposal. So I put together some slides with some notes and then an example at the end that hopefully will help you understand exactly where we're going to go with this research proposal. So kick back, relax, and let's talk about the research proposal. Okay. Okay, this is what your research paper is going to look like as far as format is concerned. You start out with chapter one, the problem issue statement, overview of the problem or issue, purpose, scope, research question or questions, hypothesis or hypotheses, your variables, and then the program outcomes that you plan to address. You have to address the first four, and then you must address one to two of the remaining. Okay, then you have a good literature review and a good methodology of indicating how you plan to test your research questions. So this is chapter one, and I know this is a review of the last time, but basically this lets you know exactly what your chapter one is going to look like. It's the first thing that we'll get to in the first 3 weeks of class, and this sets up the entire proposal. If you do a good job with chapter one, everything else is a piece of cake. The Just real fast, I made some notes. You start out with an overview of the problem or issue, whatever it is, and like we talked about before, it doesn't have to be a problem. It can be an issue. It could be something that you sit around wondering about. I wonder if the lights. We're changing all of our lights on the runway to LED from the incandescent lights. I wonder if that's going to cause the pilots any problems when they land. So that's an issue that you may want to test. And so you talk about that. You get a little bit of background, a little bit about your organization, and then you talk about the issue that you come up with. Make sure the reader understands that you know where you're going with this research. And then the purpose. The purpose of your research is to, and keep it succinct. One or two paragraphs is good enough. Let someone know exactly what you're trying to do. The purpose of the study is to determine if there's a relationship that exists between the number of hours flown per month and the number of rest hours obtained during and after each leg of these operational flights. Okay? The scope. The scope is again one paragraph or two paragraphs, plenty, but limit your scope because the one thing you'll find out as you start doing your research is that, wow, I could look at that and I could look at this and I could look at that. And all of a sudden you're too broad. You've got to keep your focus narrowed because you're only studying one aspect of the issue in your organization. You're not trying to study the entire organization, okay? This is an example, not the ones for the examples I showed you. I use this slide a lot because it really explains what the research question or hypothesis should look like because the research question identifies what issue you're thinking about. To what extent does job satisfaction affect retention among employees in a small corporate organizations? Okay? And then at least 80% of employees who have worked for the company for more than 10 years are more satisfied than those who have worked for less than 5 years. This tells you something, and you can have multiple research questions. You can have just one research question. You can have multiple hypotheses. You can have one. Whatever will answer the question for your particular research. Each program outcome must be addressed, okay? There's 12 total. I need to phrase that. Uh, the first four must be addressed. And then you address whichever of the final eight addresses that your paper addresses, okay? And so I'll show you a little bit about what I'm talking about. This is the first four, and you'll see that when you look at these, it won't be hard for you to answer the mail on these first four core competency outcomes, okay? Students will be able to apply the fundamentals of air transportation as part of a global multimodal transportation system, including technological, social, environmental, and political aspects. I guarantee you your paper will touch on one or more of these particular aspects. You don't have to touch on every one of them. You may address the technological issues And in your statement during the methodology, you'll say the social, environmental, and political are not addressed because of the scope of this research. Student will be able to identify and apply approximate statistical analysis. Well, you're going to do that. That's mandatory. You're going to do a quantitative study. Program outcome number 2 is going to be a piece of cake for you to answer because you have to do that. Student will be able the student will be able across all subjects to use the fundamentals of human factors such as unsafe acts, attitudes, errors, human behavior. These are going to fall into your category also, so it's not going to be that hard for you to address those. The student will be able to develop and apply current aviation industry-related research methods. Well, that's what we're doing. We're applying current aviation research methods with the 5 chapters that we're working on, and so that's going to be real easy for you to apply. Then 1 to 2 of the remaining 8 will apply to your paper. You just need to look at it and address whichever ones you feel 1 or 2 applies. Never more than 2. A lot of times just 1. And so they're all listed here. I have this PowerPoint in the Canvas section, so you'll be able to find this and look at this if you don't have a list already. Then you conduct a review of the relevant literature. The purpose of a literature review is to look at what you are studying in your research project and see who else has looked at something similar or very close or the same thing. In theory, you go to the literature review to find out if someone else has already done the work with your control group, and then you don't have to do anything because they've answered the question. But that's not going to happen. You may find someone's done exactly what you're going to do, but with a different control group and a different time or something like that. I kind of use it like the best example I can give you of a literature review is you're in a company and all of a sudden the boss comes in and says, next year you're responsible for the conference, the company training session weekend that you get away. So all of a sudden you've got to get a hotel, transportation, entertainment, an agenda. You've got all these things that you've got to do and you've never done it before. What's the first thing you're going to do? You're going to do a literature review, and not in the same way that we do an academic literature review, but you're going to go find the person that did it last year and get that little contingency file so you can see what they've done. And then you're going to improve on it, or you're going to change it a little bit, and you're going to use some of the parts that they have. And so that's what a literature review is, okay? And we'll spend a lot of time working on this. A literature review is note I placed here to lead with a paragraph to introduce your literature review. Okay, this is just a quick paragraph and a little dots at the end means there's a lot more to go behind that, but I wanted to put something in here as an example so you get the idea of where we're going. And then make sure that you look at all your variables, find literature on your variables, and at the end of your literature review, you tie them all together. And you use literature to do that. We'll spend a lot of time learning how to do this, and you'll be an expert at reading academic journals and putting it together into a readable form. So they're not the most exciting papers in the world, but when you start to see your literature review come together, it makes sense to you, and I think you'll find some satisfaction in this. One of the exercises in the class is to create a literature map. So you might be thinking about that as you're putting together your work. And so we'll start from week 1, finding literature on your topic. As soon as you have a topic, we're going to start finding literature. If this were a dissertation and you had 2 years to do it, you would find a narrow topic that you wanted to do your dissertation on, and then you would find every piece of literature on every variable, and you would read till you couldn't read anymore. And at the end, you would know that literature like the back of your hand, and you know who the experts are, who other people are listening to, who they're quoting, and you would have the best 25, 30 articles on every literature, on every variable. And you're going to have to do that in this 9-week class, but it's going to be on a modified scale because you're just not going to have the time to do that. So The more organized you are, the better articles you'll find. And you see right here the variables are in the blue highlighted area, and then the articles they found are below. So, this is a great idea. You have an exercise to do this anyway, so be thinking about that. The methodology needs to be 8 to 12 pages. That's really simple, especially with the program outcomes listed. But don't worry about pages. I'm not. When I grade, I'm not worried about pages. I'm worried about content. And so, the research methodology is the process used to collect information and data for the purpose of making business decisions. And the methodology include publications, research, interview, surveys, whatever techniques you're using to uh, measure your hypothesis and variables. Okay, so you include things like how did they collect the data, what is the data, how did you analyze the data, your validity is judged. Okay, so be direct and precise, include information so that the reader assume that the reader does not know anything, and write down everything you're doing, right down to the demographics, whatever information you have. And again, we'll spend a lot of time on this. Discuss anticipated problems, present a rationale, provide sufficient information, give a complete and accurate description of the data collected, the equipment, and the techniques. Okay. You might want to put a conceptual diagram in here. You'll find more and more of the research that you're pulling from, if it's within the last 4 or 5 years, uh, authors are using conceptual diagram. This is fairly extensive here. I don't advocate that you do something this complex, but really a conceptual diagram can really help you. And this could actually be in the literature review also if you wanted to use it that way. But this really explains what's happening in a picture form that will help out. So conceptual diagram, picture's worth 1,000 words, okay? Um, so look at the demographic, explain how you gather samples, talk about the subjects, talk about the questions. If you're using a survey, break down what kind of questions you have, how they help you answer the question that you've come up with in chapter one. As much information as you get. Now keep in mind, as I said before, you may not know exactly how you're going to conduct your research. And it's a lot in 9 weeks for you to come up with all this. So do the best you can, but understand that you might change some of it when you get to your capstone, okay? Describe samples, describe materials in the study, explain how you prepared the materials. Uh, Definitely talk about the research design, explain the measurements, the calculations, talk about any statistics that you might use, okay? Make sure you address each program outcome. Include a literature review whenever possible. Include literature whenever possible, because you can, like if you start talking about that you're going to use a t-test, go to a statistics book and tell the reader what a t-test is and what it does, okay? Include the who, what, when, where, and how in the literature review, okay? And this is just a quick example. We talk about the research type, definition of terms, the data collection, how the data was analyzed, and then you look at your program outcomes. These are the same program outcomes that you came up with in chapter one. And you just cut and paste the program outcomes, and then below it in italics or like it is here, talk about how you will address each program outcome. So this one's addressing program outcome one, program outcome two, program outcome three, four, and then this particular paper they addressed program outcome 5 and 6, aviation aerospace operations and aviation aerospace safety systems. And so it's really not that hard to come up with a good methodology. And then when you get to your capstone, you're going to analyze the results, you're going to form a conclusion, uh, prepare some recommendations, and then you're going to make sure what you're going to do in this class. All your references are APA cited, and you'll be on top of everything. So that's it. Now, what I want to do just real fast is I want to take you through an example. Same example that was seen before, but I don't think it's too much to talk about that. So this is what your paper is going to look like. If you copy this cover sheet, put your information in there, you will be ahead of the game. If you copy this table of contents, put your information in there, you will be ahead of the game. And then the abstract, understand that in the proposal, you're going to write in the abstract what you're going to do. When you get to the capstone, you'll switch that to what you did, okay? And you need some keywords. That's always good. And then the introduction, the overview, and you go through purpose, the scope, research question or questions, hypothesis, what variables you plan to use, benefits of the study. That's just thrown in there. You can have that if you want to. You don't have to. And then list your program outcomes. This particular one, everyone has to do 1 through 4. This particular person is looking at number 10. Okay. Literature review then, operational tempo, human factors, same. Make sure you cover all your variables. And at the end, finish it with a paragraph or two that ties them all together. And then your methodology. Talk about the research type. Give the reader every bit of information that you have, okay? And data collection. A lot of good information here. This is, again, like I said before, this is not a perfect example, but it's a good example. And data analysis, program outcomes. You see, you took the same program outcome from chapter 1 and then addressed how this particular research was going to address that program outcome. And then make sure your references are APA. So this is Dr. Don Four. I'm looking forward to working with each and every one of you. I think that this will be a great class, and we're going to build this chapter 1 at the end of week 3, chapter 2 at the end of week 5, chapter 3 at the end of week 7. I will give you good feedback, and you will correct the suggestions that I make, or tell me why you're not going to. Whichever one will either correct it or fix it, explain it or fix it. And at the end of the week 9, everyone should do really well, and you should go into your capstone with a great proposal. So this is Dr. Don Four. I've enjoyed talking to you and look forward to working with you the rest of this term. Thank you very much.